justice, transforming lives. It's this drive, this compassion that inspired AARP. Today, we empower people to choose how they live as they age. As a wise friend and fierce defender, we advocate for better health, financial security, and stronger communities. AARP, join us in making a difference.
I think as soon as Liz is ready, we can get started. Francis, what do you think?
I think I'm ready.
Yep, I am all set.
Okay. You ready?
Yes, here we go.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining AARP New Hampshire's sponsored program with the Creative Feast. Today's program is Let's Get to the Root, Fall Root Vegetables. We will be learning how to prepare a variety of seasonal root vegetables to create 2 delicious recipes. Today's event is part of a series with the Creative Feast, focusing on food and its impact on healthy living. My name is Frances Donahue, and your host and a volunteer with AARP New Hampshire. For over 60 years, AARP has been promoting the health and well-being of older Americans. Here in New Hampshire, we strive to bring you informative, innovative, and fun virtual events, like today's online cook-along demonstration, as a means of connection and inclusion. If you have any questions or comments during this session about AARP New Hampshire or the cooking demonstration, please put them in the Q&A section or in the chat. And my fellow volunteer, Mary Roberg and Ashley Davis, the Associated Director of Outreach and Advocacy, will raise them to Liz. AARP also has numerous free healthy living resources on its website, from staying fit to wellness and longevity. Information on healthy living, as well as staying sharp. There's something for everyone. Mary will put a link in the chat. Chef Liz of Hollis, New Hampshire, built her cooking career in a variety of Boston's catering and restaurant settings. After starting her family, she re-entered the food world as a cooking instructor with Liz Barber's Creative Feast. Her recipes and teaching style connected with her community, and Liz soon had a large following of loyal students. Liz is a regular guest of New Hampshire's WMUR Cook's Corner, and her cooking demonstration and recipes are featured in various publications, including Where Women Cook, New Hampshire Magazine, the Nashua Telegraph, and the Hippo Press. All her programs focus on the premise that we are healthier when we cook at home. We hope you enjoyed today's program. Liz, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much. And welcome everybody to my studio kitchen here in Hollis, New Hampshire. It's a pleasure to be with you through AARP New Hampshire, and I'm so glad that you could join us today. We are moving along with our cooking series, and today we're talking about cooking with root vegetables. And I think these oftentimes root vegetables, we really put them, we think of them as a very small category. Potatoes, sweet potatoes, onions, but there are many different types of root vegetables, and they all have different flavor profiles. I always tell people, when I suggest a new vegetable to them and they say, oh, you know what? I had that when I was little. I never liked it. My mother never knew how to cook it. So it's possible that your mother cooked it in a way that you did not find appealing. But over the past 60, 70 years, we've been introduced to a lot of different cooking methods and incorporating vegetables in a lot of different ways than when, maybe, 60 years ago. A lot of root vegetables were simply boiled because, root vegetables are much more dense. Obviously, they're grown below the ground. They have a higher sugar content. And so bringing out those natural sugars in a flavorful way, there are a lot of different ways to do it. So today we're going to be focusing on two recipes using some of, two of my favorite methods for working with root vegetables. The first one, we're going to be making a a salad using turnips. I know a lot of people are like, oh, I've never had turnips or I never liked them. But this is a really wonderful way to do that. We're going to roast them. That will help to bring out their natural sugars. It will also caramelize them. And on top of that, we're going to be putting a wonderful dressing that has that sweet, savory combination that really works beautifully with root vegetables. And then the second dish we're going to be making is a gratin. So that is basically, if you've ever had potatoes au gratin, that is potatoes that are sliced, layered with wonderful cream, wonderful cheese, and put in the oven and cooked until those potatoes are soft and bubbly with the cheese and the cream. And it's really wonderful. It's one of the traditional meals that we find on our holiday tables. But we're changing that up by adding in some other root vegetables. Now, the recipe that I shared with you that you may be cooking from today focuses on using sweet potatoes, regular potatoes, or Yukon Gold potatoes, and beets. If you're not a beet fan, you can add instead turnips. You could use rutabaga. You could use carrots if you prefer. You could increase your regular potatoes and sweet potatoes and make it just those two items. There's a lot of different things you can do to these recipes. So I want to take you first to my website to show you where the recipes are, and then we're going to get right into the cooking. Before we do that, for those of you cooking along, we need to do one thing because it takes a little while for this to, this part of the first recipe, the turnip recipe, to come together. So in the recipe, it called for raisins. It called for golden raisins, but I had some regular raisins, which are fine to use. And it calls for 2 tablespoons of balsamic vinegar. We actually want these to soak in the vinegar for at least a half an hour, and that will help to plump them up. So that's what I'm doing right now. So for those of you cooking along, you can do that now. Set it aside. I'll set it right there. And then let's go over, I'm going to share with you my screen and show you where you can find the recipes. So let me just take you to my website at thecreativefeast.com. And here is where you're going to find these recipes and many others that you are always welcome to look for. If we go over to the Food and Fun where it says recipe blog, you will see that I created a page just for the AARP cook along classes. So if you click on that, that will give you all of the recipes that we've been doing for this series beginning back in January of 2023. So all of those are here so that if you want to go back in time and maybe you've forgotten one of the recipes, you want to repeat a recipe, they are all here. Now, here are our root vegetables. So I'm going to share those. That's where you're going to find your recipe. So if you just click on that, it will pop up on your screen. Remember that next month, October 17th, we're doing 15-minute meals. So you want to register for that. And then following, we're going to do low-carb bread. And then in December, we're going to be doing the holiday French apple tart. So these are recipes that are available to you. So some of you may be joining me today, and this is where you find your recipes, okay? But you can always go back to my recipe page in general, and there you're going to find recipes from all the classes that I've been doing and sharing. There's lots for you to see here. You can check those out. You can use the search button, or on the right-hand side, you'll see that I have categories of my recipes according to classes and topics. and you can click on those and that will help you out. Okay, so that's where the recipes are. So why don't we go ahead and get started? I'm going to set aside my root vegetables. If you're cooking along with me, you should have already peeled your root vegetables. So we're just setting them aside. I've done some slicing, but we'll talk about that later. You know, when we're working on camera, it's important to keep everything going. So I did a few things ahead of time, and you can catch up while we're creating the recipe. Now, these are my turnips, and I keep saying parsnips because the alternative to the turnips are you could do parsnips in this recipe, or quite honestly, you could do carrots if you prefer. If you wanted to do potatoes, that would be great. Sweet potatoes would be wonderful. The dressing that we're going to be making is delicious on any roasted vegetable. So I like to keep this dressing in my refrigerator. It will stay in the refrigerator, you know, for several weeks. So don't be afraid that you're going to have extra. You're going to find a lot of uses for this vinaigrette. Now, I also always want to make sure that I give credit where credit is due. This recipe comes from one of my favorite cookbooks called 6 Seasons by Joshua McFadden. I highly recommend that you grab this book if you haven't already, because he breaks it down into using the shoulder seasons. So that means there's, you know, fall, late fall, summer, late summer. So you can have use your vegetables all season long, and you'll find many, many different types of cooking techniques that you may have never tried. Also, Joshua is really interested in building yourself a pantry of vinaigrettes, butters, things like that, that you'll have on hand that you can add anytime that you know, you've got vegetables, and you're like, I really don't know what to do with these. But I have a vinaigrette in the refrigerator that I can use. So I'll just go ahead and roast these up, or I'll saute them up, and then I've got my vinaigrette. So those are great things to keep in mind, is to have some really good vinaigrettes on hand that you've made yourself. All right, now I've got my oven on. So if you're cooking along with me, make sure your oven is on. We want it on to 450 degrees. So I'm going to make sure that I've got that nice high oven. Also, we're going to be roasting these turnips. So you want to have the pan that you're roasting them in the oven. That is going to help sear these immediately as they hit the oven. Now, the pan that I'm using today is a cast iron pan. I prefer to use those. They do well under high temperatures. And it's plenty of room in my big 12-inch cast iron pan for the parsnips. So that's what I've got in my oven preheating. If you've ever done one of my classes on sheet pan meals, it's the same kind of method. Get that pan hot, and it almost seems as though it takes the place of a saute pan on the stovetop where you're going to sear something. This is going to happen in the oven immediately, okay? Also, for those of you who have convection ovens, go right ahead and turn the convection program on, because that will help to blow that nice hot air across the surface of your vegetables and will help to give them that caramelization that really adds to this dish. All right, now I've peeled my turnips, and now it's time to slice them. So I wanted to show you how I do that. So I found that if I cut them in half, and then I'm going to cut them into about 1/2-inch wedges this way, okay? Now they're only going to roast for about 12 to 15 minutes. So you want to make sure that you have them an even thickness, okay? And that it actually be a little bit on the thinner side so that they can cook in that amount of time. Whenever you're going to be cutting something like this, you want to be using a sharp knife. You want to take your vegetable and very carefully cut it in half so that you have 2 flat surfaces. This will help to keep your vegetable from rolling, which could cause an injury if you cut it and then it rolls. The other thing is, when working with root vegetables, remember they're very dense, and so it's hard to get a knife through. So you really want to be on the safe side. Notice here what I'm doing is I've got my thumb on the vegetable, and then this part of my hand is going to help push down the tip of my knife. All right. You always want to be paying very close attention when you're working like this, and make sure that you are standing firmly in front of your cutting board. You don't want to be standing to the side, leaning on something. And honestly, if you can be standing rather than sitting, you're going to have a much more better leverage when you're doing this. So you always want to be standing, okay? But again, notice how very carefully I'm going through the vegetable, the turnip. Now, turnips are similar to rutabagas, okay? Rutabagas are the really large ones, and they have a yellow flesh. So you instead could decide, oh, you know what? I'm just gonna buy one big rutabaga, and I'm gonna peel that, and I'm gonna use that instead of the turnips. That would be fine. The flavor is very, very similar. So you should feel free to do that. I have found too, I've been working on trying to eat lower carbohydrate foods, and root vegetables are below the ground. They do grow in the ground. Their growing time is much longer than an above the ground vegetable, and so they have a lot more time to develop their natural sugars. But there is a spectrum of carbohydrate or high glycemic on the index there. So, potatoes are very high in starches and very high in carbohydrates. Sweet potatoes are also, but the root vegetables that are the really dense ones, more in the line of the rutabaga and the turnips, have a little bit lower on the glycemic index. So I like to switch things up. I have cooked these like I would preparing mashed potatoes, where I cut them, I boil them maybe with a little bit of garlic, some salt and pepper, and then I mash them, and they're really quite delicious and excuse me, an alternative to potatoes. One thing I also like to point out, for those of you who are very concerned about the amount of carbohydrates and starches that you're taking in, there is a term called resistant starch. And this is a really important thing to know. This can help you lower your carbohydrate intake and how much your body absorbs. So if I take a high carbohydrate food like a potato or a turnip, sweet potato, rice is another one. If I cook it, right, and then I refrigerate it, the chemical change of that vegetable from cooking into refrigeration will allow our bodies to, once you then go the next day, for example, to eat it, you can reheat it, but the cooling of those vegetables creates something called a resistant starch, and our body will absorb fewer starches, fewer carbohydrates after it's been heated, cooled, and then reheated. So if you're looking to naturally cut down what your body absorbs in carbohydrates, try the resistant starch method. If you go to my website, there's information where it says low carb under the recipes that talks about resistant starch. So it's a great tip to know. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and get these babies in the oven. So I'm just putting in the pan right now just to give it some olive oil, salt, and pepper. So just drizzle it with a little bit of olive oil, okay? And we always want to season what we are cooking, because the salt will actually help to bring out the flavors, bring out the natural sugars. So you don't want to miss out on that. You don't have to over season, but really you want to entice your taste buds. So on goes a little bit of salt, on goes some fresh ground pepper. If you can use fresh ground pepper, it's always more flavorful than pepper that is already ground. And then we're just going to toss that. Okay. And now I'm going to bring out my cast iron pan from the oven. And then, because I want you to see and hear what a hot pan sounds like, right? So in this goes. Can you hear it sizzling? Okay, so now already we have started the cooking process, and that is going to help the turnips to brown and to caramelize their natural sugar. So you want to lay that out and then pop them right back into the oven to finish their cooking. All right, and I'm going to set my timer for about 14 minutes. Let's see how that goes. We're going to test it with a fork. We're going to test it for what we call fork tender. And I'm going to describe that to you so you know exactly what you should be looking for. And then we'll have that out. So our timer is on. Now it's time to do our dressing. Okay, so remember I had you soaking your raisins. They probably should go another 10 minutes, but I'm going to jump ahead in this recipe. I don't think you're going to taste much of a difference. So we're going to go ahead and add those in for our vinaigrette. So what is in the vinaigrette? Well, we've got a lot of things here. We've got garlic, of course. So I'm going to go ahead and smash my garlic, remove the skin, and you're going to put it in the food processor. If you do not have a food processor, you can simply chop this all very fine by hand and then mix it together. It is intended to be kind of on the chunky side, so you don't have to worry about having, a really fine vinaigrette. So don't worry about that. Okay, so just a rough chop. And if you're not a garlic fan, you can always use less garlic than what I have here. I really enjoy garlic, especially when it's fresh from my garden, which this is. Let me just bring this up so we can touch this on the overhead camera here. Okay, so in that goes. Now, let's give that a little bit of a spin with our capers. Okay, the capers are going to add a salted, briny flavor to your dish. If you're not someone that has capers, if you have regular like green olives that have a brine to them, you could use a couple of those instead. So let's go ahead and give a little bit of a spin. This is to help us to chop up the garlic and our capers. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and add in our soaked raisins. All right, with all of that balsamic vinegar. Now the balsamic vinegar, again, is going to have that sweet, savory tang to it because balsamic is made from raisins. It gets that dark color, but it's also a pretty sweet vinegar. So give that a little bit of a chop. Okay. Now, here comes the ingredient that I think a lot of people were like, what? I'm going to add an entire can of anchovies. Yes, you are. So, first of all, I drained the anchovies, so you want to make sure you do that. Second of all, anchovies in a recipe like this, they don't end up tasting like fish. They are salted, so they're going to add that salt flavor. But in Italian cooking, anchovies often add that, it's kind of, well, they call it umami. It's a background flavor. It adds a richness to something that you're preparing, a depth, okay? And so when we see a recipe that calls for anchovy, I highly recommend you try it. I have made this vinaigrette several times. Never once has anyone tasted and said, oh, did you put anchovies in this? You just don't taste it. It's all about building that rich flavor. So that's what these are for, and they're going to go right in the entire 2-ounce container.
Liz, do you have any alternatives for anchovies? We have someone in the chat who has a family member with an allergy.
Ah, okay. So you might consider doing It's a soybean paste. Why can't I suddenly flew out of my head? Hold on, I've got it in the fridge. Soybean paste is going to add the same kind of umami flavor. Yep, I'm reaching into my fridge and I'm pulling it out.
Thank you.
So yeah, so a couple miso paste would be a really nice substitute. And I would start with about 1 to 2 tablespoons at the most. Because again, that has a lot of salt in it, but that also adds that umami. So I'm glad you mentioned that, and I'm so happy I came up with an alternative for you. All right, let me get this. All right, now we're going to add to this, we have some fresh parsley. I like to use flat leaf parsley. So we're going to grab that. And when I'm working with parsley, I want to make sure that I remove these thicker stems because they do tend to be on the bitter side. So that's what I'm going to do. And Ashley, do we have any other questions at this point? All right, I'm guessing not. Okay, so I love to use flat leaf parsley in here. It's an easy herb to have. Again, just pulling it off of the stems like this. You don't have to be too crazy. And before I put it into my food processor, I'm going to give this a good rough chop because I find that my food processor doesn't get this as fine as I like. So I like to break it down first a little bit. Okay, do a nice little bit of a chop. Now, I, of course, pre-tested this recipe. I've had it several times. We had it last night, and I just really loved it. It's wonderful with a roasted meat, but it's also a great side dish, and you can even serve it cold if you have leftovers or something like that. That is a really nice addition. All right, in this goes. As you'll see, this is a very chunky vinaigrette, okay? Lots of chunks in there, and that's okay. That gives it texture, which is really nice. All right, now we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna add olive oil to that. So I've got about, let me just check my recipe here. Up, 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 up. We've got a third cup of, sorry, we've got about a third of a cup of extra virgin olive oil. So that's gonna go in. Perfect. Now, the last ingredient is going to be half a lemon, and we're going to add that after we take our turnips out of the oven. That bit of acid is going to, especially with the lemon, is going to brighten up the dish and really lift it in flavor. So again, it's all these layers of how to really add to the recipe for flavor, how to lift that root vegetable flavor that is often very rich, how to lift it up off the plate. So that's how we do that. Okay, so my vinaigrette is all set. So I'm just going to set that aside. And of course, I had already made some last night. So I've got that here. So for those of you who are cooking along, just know that that vinaigrette is super easy to make. And again, will store in your refrigerator for several weeks. All right, so we've got our lemon over there. We've got a few more minutes on the clock for our delicious turnips. And now let's go ahead and clean off our cutting board so we can get ready for the gratin. So this is, it's really, it's easy to do. The flavor is nice and rich. This is wonderful for any kind of dish. I've also found that if I make this dish, I can freeze what I don't want to eat and bring it out, and it thaws beautifully and heats up beautifully. So if you want to make the full recipe, but you know you're not going to eat it in the next couple of days, package it up and store it in the freezer. It's a really great recipe to do that with. All right, so let's get our vegetables ready for that. Now, I mentioned that I have pre-sliced, so that is something that takes a great deal of time. So I tried to get ahead of the game on that. Now, this recipe, what we want to be doing is we want to keep our vegetables separate from each other, because the whole goal of the recipe is to show the recipe finished in different colors. So let me show you. I prepared this last night, and I wanted to show you how beautiful that is so you can see. So this is a small gratin. So this was just for my husband and I. So I cut the recipe in half, a little bit less. And so here I layered my potatoes on this side. I used some yellow beets, which I did here. I thought that would be fun. And then here are my sweet potatoes, and here are my red beets. So those are all in rows. There's heavy cream mixed in and cheese, and I'm going to show you how to do that. But I wanted to show you what a beautiful presentation this is at the end. But let's get started on that. So here I have my vegetables all set. So I have already sliced my sweet potatoes. Now, I sliced them on a mandolin, and I'm going to show you how to do that. But when I prepared this last night, I'm just getting all the extra water out. When I prepared this last night, I sliced them by hand, just with a knife. So I do, this is the time, if you're going to be doing it by hand, that you want to make sure you are working with a very sharp knife, because that will help you to make a nice, clear, clean cut. So let's go ahead. I've got my potatoes here, but I saved one. I just peeled it. I will say that you don't have to peel your potatoes, okay? Depending on what you're doing. I have made this dish using red potatoes. And I just leave the skin on because the red skin adds some wonderful color to it. So I don't necessarily peel them. Even with the Yukon Gold, you do not have to peel them. But you do want to use these potatoes that, as they cook, they're a little bit sweeter, and their texture is more, they'll stand up. If you're using a baking potato, that's a very starchy potato, and that's going to have almost a mealy texture to you. So you don't want to use that kind of potato. Now, this is my mandolin. This is, a tool that I have had for many years. For those of you who have never used one, but you do a lot of slicing of vegetables, and this comes in very handy. But I know a lot of people are afraid of it. And when you are using it, you just want to follow the information that comes with it. It does have a sharp blade here. But the beauty of this is that every slice then is consistently the same thickness. Now, we want to go nice and thin, because the thinner we go, the faster this will cook, and it won't burn on top. It will all cook from the inside. So you want to be consistent in your thickness. So 1/8 to 1/4 is a little bit on the thick side. So really, really thin, as thin as you can get it. All right, now I'm going to take my potato that I have peeled, and it helps that I have this potato soaking in water, because the starch of the potato, when you're slicing on a mandolin, will actually catch the potato and can make it real sticky. So that's why I always like to soak the potato when I'm going to slice it like this. So this is how easy this is. All right, and then you can see these wonderful thin slices of my potato. Now, if you're going to do this by hand, you want to be very careful and just keep your eye on what you're slicing. And again, have a very sharp knife. I'm just going to check our oven. Okay, I'm going to set this aside, because remember, we have our turnips in the oven. So let me just grab those, see what that looks like. And let's give it a test, because remember I told you we want this to be fork tender. Okay, so as I turn these over, they are browning, which is beautiful. Give them a little bit of a stir. And then I'm going to test them. So fork tender is putting your fork in and having it come right out. It should sink in very easily. Now these are, I think they need another 5 to 7 minutes. I think that my oven temperature was not as high as it should be. So I'm patient. We have the time. So I'm going to pop this back into the oven. But it was not easy to get my fork in and out. You see how it's stuck? It should go in and come out easily when it's fork tender. All right. So back in this goes, and I'm going to reset my timer to cook that up. I'm going to add another 7 minutes just to be on the safe side. In my estimation, you really can't overcook these. So that is what we're going to do. All right. So as I mentioned, you can go ahead and slice these on your own. Just try to get them as thin as possible. All right. Keep your eye on what you're doing. And there you go. All right. So now we have our potatoes sliced beautifully thin. All right. This is for the full recipe. Okay. For the 9.5 by 13 pan, or in this case, I'm going to be using this beautiful gratin pan that I got. I got that at a yard sale, and it's got my favorite Dutch pattern on it. I keep looking for these all over, and I'm building my my collection. Okay, now we also have beets, and beets, these are raw beets. When you are slicing them, it is a good idea to use gloves, because otherwise you will stain your fingers. I like to keep a little box of disposable gloves. I get them at the grocery store, and that way I have them for tasks like this always. Okay, so I have sliced my beet. All right. Again, as I mentioned before, if you're not a beet fan, and my husband is not a beet fan, you don't have to put the beets in. You could do sliced turnips. You could do sliced parsnips. You could do double up on these. You could add more of those as root vegetables. So don't worry about that. I did for Thanksgiving one year, I only did the sweet potato and the regular potato, and people loved it. So you can do all 3 vegetables, or cut back down to 2 if you prefer. All right. So next step. All right. So in our pan, we want to butter the bottom. Okay. There's never any harm in adding butter, so that will help us to be able to get our vegetables out. And do remember, if you make this and you have extra, just cut it up, freeze it in containers, and then anytime you want to have this, you will have it. So in goes our butter. All right, use that up. And then in bottom, we're going to add a couple of things. So we do have 1 to 2 cloves of chopped garlic. So those are going to add a wonderful flavor to this. We also have heavy cream. You can use whole milk if that's all you have, but it won't thicken up as much. The heavy cream is going to add all that wonderful fat to it that is going to help to thicken this up with the cheese that you're adding as well. So
we have a couple questions about that, actually. There's someone in the chat who can't have dairy and was wondering what alternatives there are. She was wondering about olive oil for the pan, and I'm sure would need some other suggestions as well.
Sure. Yeah. Olive oil would be just fine. But actually, okay, so we could do olive oil. You could do coconut oil if you want. If you're somebody who has tallow, you can use that. That will give it a real rich flavor to it. The only thing is that a gratin is, you know, not, it is a cheese cream based dish. So if you are somebody who regularly avoids dairy, I'm sure you're probably eating a non-dairy cheese, which you could use as long as it melts. You could use, oh, I have a great idea. You could use a really good canned coconut milk, and then it would have a wonderful, it's going to go into this coconut Asian flavor profile, which all of a sudden now I want to try that. So that would be nice. And you know what you could do? You could use the garlic that I have, like just like I have here. And you can add chopped ginger to it in the bottom. And then you could use coconut milk instead of heavy cream. And you could go with or without the non-dairy cheese. So I think I've come up with a new recipe. All right. What's the next question, Ashley?
There was just another question asking if you peel the beets.
I did. Thank you for asking. Yes, I did peel the beets. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Want to do that.
And then the last question, someone said that you had mentioned the starch in the potatoes can affect the slicing. Was there something that you did special for that?
Yes. So what the point I was making is when you use a mandolin, and sometimes it happens with your knife too, and you're slicing the potatoes, and then you know how they stick to it, right? And then it's very difficult. It's the starch, it's the sticky starch. So I soaked my potato after I peeled them, I put them in water. And that helps to keep the potato to slide on the mandolin. And when you're cutting it by hand, it helps the knife to slide right through the potatoes.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay. We buttered our pan. I just threw the garlic in there. Here's about a quarter cup of heavy cream. Okay. And then a little bit of cheese. Now, again, if you're going to go that wonderful, I'm going to make this the coconut route, you can use garlic and ginger and use the coconut milk, right? And so this just really gives it a base, right? It keeps everything from sticking to the bottom. And that's what we're doing this here. We're moving that garlic around to make sure that every vegetable that's touching is going to have a little bit of that garlic. Okay, so perfect. Now it's time to get our vegetables ready for this. And this is where you're going to get your hands a little bit messy. All right, so I wanted to make sure that all of my water is drained out. Oh, there are turnips again. So let's give this a try. We added about 7 minutes onto the roasting time of our turnips. Let's check our fork tender test. Much better. There's still a little bit of resistance in there. I'm gonna give them a stir. I really do think that the reason this is taking longer is because I had, by mistake, my oven set at 400 degrees instead of 450. So that's why it's taking a little bit longer. So let's pop it back in. And like I said, I'm just gonna add 5 minutes. It can never be too much cooking, in my opinion. All right, so here we have our sweet potato. I'm gonna go ahead and mix that with, I have a couple tablespoons of heavy cream, and I have my cheese in here. All right, now each of these is going to go in their own separate bowl, so that we don't, mix them up and then we don't have those beautiful lines. But also, you want to keep the beets on their own because they will bleed that red color. So we don't want to mix that in. So in goes our sweet potatoes. Okay. And we're going to go ahead and you can add a little bit of salt and pepper to that. You do want to add a little bit of flavor to everything. Okay. And a little bit of pepper. Okay, I'm going to toss them all at one time. That way I don't have to keep washing my hands. Then I've got my regular potatoes. I had a few potatoes left over from last night when I was making this, so that's what's in here. Make sure again that I have the extra water out. Toss these in. All right. And then add my salt and pepper. I use kosher salt, whatever salt you prefer, but you do want to add that flavor. Okay. So that is 1, 2. Let's go number 3. Here is our, remember, cream and cheese. All right, mixed in. Now this is for the beets on their own. Now I'm going to go a little light on the beets because it's not my husband's favorite. These leftover beets, I am going to make, for those of you who joined the pickle class last month, I am going to make a brine with vinegar and some sugar and a little bit of red pepper. I'm going to heat that brine up, and then I'm going to pour it over my very thinly sliced beets, and it'll help to cook them up just a little bit while they come down to room temperature. And then I'm going to bottle them up and keep them in the refrigerator. So I'm not going to use all my beets today. Again, I got to make my husband happy, right? So he's not a beet fan. I get it. I'm just going to stir these beets. They're mixed with the cream and the cheese so that they will stick together in the pan, which is what we're looking for. That's one. Now this I'm just going to get my hands into. Actually, do we have any questions while I'm doing this?
We are doing really well. We did have someone ask about the spices, if they were using coconut milk, and if there were any changes that you'd make.
Yeah, I would stick with the garlic that's in the recipe, and I would just add freshly chopped ginger. I would add probably about, I don't know. I love ginger, so I would add a whole tablespoon, but that's me. I would also add more garlic. But that would be the main change. And then pouring the coconut milk on top, or mixing it just like this, will help. Now remember, I've got some cheese in here, so that cheese is going to help these stick together. Notice how I'm trying to take these and separate them so they all get a little bit of that heavy cream in there, a little bit of salt and pepper, a little bit of cheese, and then you're going to see as I'm stacking them how that's all going to come together.
Wonderful. And then we just had one more question asking, what are the benefits of beets? And I know there's a lot of health benefits there.
Yeah, so beets have a lot of antioxidants. I find, I have to say, I'm not a nutritionist, but one of the rules that I follow in my diet is the more color in my diet, the healthier I am eating. And so I find I love beets. I prefer beets that are cooked, but raw beets are also very nice, shaved into salads and things like that. I love roasted beets. But I think it's all about variety. Do remember that beets are a very sugar heavy root vegetable, right? So you want to be cautious about how much beets you're eating. All right, let's go ahead and I'm going to take out these turnips, and I am just going to set them aside for now. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to set them aside, and I'm going to put a pot cover over top so that the steam comes up and keeps them warm, so that when we finish this off, it's going to be super flavorful. So I'm just going to pop that on there, and we're going to leave those to the side. Now we've got our vegetables coated, all right? And the last part here that I had forgotten to do, so we'll just stir those in, is we do have some fresh thyme, okay? And so chop that up, and that is going to add some wonderful flavor. So a couple teaspoons of this fresh thyme. I'm going to give everything another stir just to make sure that we get that thyme mixed throughout. And that extra flavor really adds a lot to this dish. All right. Stir that up. Perfect. And then we're getting ready to layer this in our pan. And then you're going to roast this in the oven, covered with tinfoil, because that will help to basically kind of steam your vegetables. So that's going to be important. And then the first 20 minutes will be covered with foil. Then you take the foil off, and then you're going to add some Swiss cheese or Gruyere on top, and then pop it back in the oven for another 15 to 20 minutes, and then you are done. So let's get this layered here. Okay, so we have our pan, and we're looking to create a beautifully colored dish. So what I'm doing here is adding my regular potatoes, okay, and just putting them all together so that they're in a wonderful line here. And then I'm going to add some sweet potatoes. Stack those up, standing on edge. Those edges are going to get beautifully browned and crispy. All the way to the edge. Now it looks like I could probably add a few more potatoes in here, so I'm going to take a few more, stack them in. Okay, then we're going to go ahead and I'm going to stack my beets. They're going to go right down the middle. Oh, this is going to be so beautiful. You see how beautiful that is already? And it looks like I could have used some more beets. All right, hubby's going to have to suffer. Let's just use these up. Don't tell him I did that. Okay. Add this up. Probably should have done it from the start. Let's put these back in so that they're all evenly mixed with lots of flavor. Our herbs and our heavy cream. And that's going to go right down the middle. Now, I have made a recipe similar to this. I subscribe to the New York Times recipes app, and there was this recipe stacked top to bottom, and then you sliced into it, so you got essentially a slice of rainbow root vegetables. It was delicious and it was beautiful. So this is an easier version of that, and really still has all the color that you want, but it is a lot easier to do it this way. So I'm glad that we're doing this together today. All right, retoss, always retoss. All right, and in these go, just like that. Now you're going to be cooking these covered in a 400-degree oven, as I mentioned, for about 20 minutes. And then you're going to go ahead and take off the tinfoil, and then you're going to go ahead and add your Gruyere, or Swiss cheese is a really nice substitute for that. All right, I'm going to stack these in, get them all jammed in there. Okay, and then we have the rest of our potatoes will go in there. I had some pretty big potatoes here. If I have leftovers, I can just boil these up and make a wonderful little mashed potato there. Okay. Now, that's almost all set. Super easy. You do want to cook this fully. Once it's cooked, like I mentioned, if you have leftovers, then those leftovers can be frozen, but you can't freeze the raw vegetables. Look at that. This is going to be beautiful on the table. All right. Now, I have leftover cream with, some seasoning in there, so I don't want any of that to go to waste. That's only going to add to the flavor of this dish. And so all of that goes in. Just like that. And I'm going to rinse off my hands. And then we're going to finish up our parsnips and serve up some of this dish that I've already made. Let me grab my foil because I wanted to show you. You're just going to wrap up this dish. Okay, so this is so beautiful, just the way it is. Imagine what that's going to look like once we roast that up. So cover that up. That will go in a 400-degree oven for about 20 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes until they've started to soften up and you'll see them bubbling up a bit. And then you're going to take off the top. I've got my Gruyere cheese here. I'll sprinkle that on top, put it back in the oven without the top on, without the foil on. And then that will go ahead and get nice and crispy on top. Okay, Ashley, I'm going to move to the final parts of our roasted turnip recipe. Are there any questions?
Nope, everything looks great.
Excellent, excellent. All right. I don't mind answering questions, but I'm always glad that if there are no questions, then hopefully in the instruction, I've answered all your questions, and that always makes me feel good. Okay, let's go ahead and bring our beautiful parsnip, keep saying parsnips, turnips over. So this is the end of this dish. Now, my pan is still hot. Those are still hot. And I'm going to, where's my bowl? Did I have a nice bowl? I thought I had a beautiful bowl. Let me go grab a nice bowl. I must have put it back into the pantry. So this calls for a lovely bowl right here. So we're going to go ahead and take our turnips. And I would go ahead and toss these with a little bit of a vinaigrette. The residual heat will warm up that vinaigrette for you. Okay, and it's 2 tastes, but about a half a cup should really give you, you want to really coat this. You don't want to leave too much behind. Okay, so there are nice warm turnips with their vinaigrette dressing right on top. And then, as I mentioned to you, the idea of really bringing out the bold flavors and having it jump up off the plate is to add a little bit of lemon juice. You can taste it and see if you need a little bit of salt and pepper, but there is our beautiful parsnip dish. Maybe we have, oh, I have some, let's add some parsley to that, pretty that plate up a little bit. And then let's cut into our gratin that I made last night a little bit so that we have a little bit of a visual here. Maybe take a spatula is what I'm looking for. Here we go. Nice small little spatula. I'm gonna take this. Beautiful. We'll take a little bit of each of these. Perfect. This can be rewarmed if you have leftovers. As we mentioned earlier, it can be frozen. But there is our beautiful root vegetable gratin. Be sure to serve it with something delicious to go alongside. But there are dishes. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. Don't forget, your recipes are on the website, on the AARP tab by the recipes. So everything is right there. Ashley, before we go, do we have any other questions?
Thanks, Liz. There was one last question. Someone said that they have a tradition where they cook the veggies before Thanksgiving. and reheat the day of. Do you think that would work for this dish?
It would work perfectly for the gratin and for the parsnips. What I would not do is, if you're going to cook the parsnips if you're going to do the turnips the day before, don't dress them. Reheat them while they're hot, then add the dressing to them. But this is going to be perfect for reheating. It's going to be really delicious. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you again, everybody, for joining me here in my kitchen in Hollis, New Hampshire. It's always a pleasure to bring you some really fun recipes, recipes that are healthy for you, and recipes that really take you to your local farm stand. So this is the time to get to your farm stands. It's the perfect time of year. So much is coming in from the fields. So be sure to support your local farmers. Ashley, thank you to AARP New Hampshire and to you and the ladies who have helped bring this to everybody today. Take care, everybody.
Yep. Thank you, Liz.